No, definitely. And once again, thanks for the opportunity for inviting me on. And anything I say here, not part of the military anymore, not in the government. However, any opinions I express is based solely on my opinion and experience and doesn't reflect, views or anything like formal positions of the U.S. Air Force or the government. So, getting that out of the way. But so yeah, Chris Johnson. I enlisted in the Air Force in 2017 with the PJ contract, graduated the pipeline, and then spent the next 5 years, as a PJ, conducting personnel recovery, a lot of training, ready for missions like the one that we just witnessed recently in the last week or so, and left the military. What July of last year.
Wow.
Now, man, time flies. To focus really more on family. Just had a second kid, and wanted to spend a little bit of time with family. Currently, right now, I guess backing up, I was in the reserves the last 2 years, so 2023 to 2025. Same thing as a PJ. Believe it or not, Guard Reserve is kind of like the hidden gem of the military.
Hmm.
A lot of the same things that active duty PJs, active duty SEALs, Green Berets, you name the unit. A lot of those guys go over to the Guard Reserve side. So you have, quite a bit of experience over there. Guys who are focusing a little bit more on family, but still want to do the mission. And guys really get after it. So I wanted to do that for a little bit while I pursued my graduate degree, international security. Earned that this last December. Worked for Booz Allen for a couple years, working with folks at the Pentagon, unrelated to, what I was doing as a PJ.
Mhm.
However, kind of got to see the policy and strategy side of things, career development in particular. Gave me new appreciation for the officer side of the Air Force as opposed to the enlisted side. Left that in October of this last year, and now am working as a contractor for Vigilant, which does essentially contract personnel recovery for the DoD.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So still in it, in the track a lot of your career. So very unique. I mean, Booz Allen obviously, your masters shows there's some geopolitical chops in there as well. So that's exactly what we do at Opus here at OAS. So I love that. So I actually just want to kind of go over this F-15 rescue, and then there's a few
Sure.
conspiracy theories swimming around out there. So I just want to hear from the guys that actually been there. So, like, just walk us through. First question here is kind of like, what happens in that first 60 minutes, right? The pilot ejects. What happens? I mean, for those of us that are laymen, what happens and how do you get activated and what's sort of the process there?
Yeah. And again, for a lot of this, like, more details come out every day. So I'm learning a lot of it,
Totally.
along with everyone else as well. However, the pilot ejected, the F-15E ejected. Both individuals, obviously, very traumatic experience being ejected from an aircraft, as I understand. Pretty traumatic on the spine. So you're confused, disoriented, and afraid, as a pilot, as any individual, in a country where we have very little to no actual boots on the ground presence. So that creates a number of issues. In Iraq and Afghanistan, Syria, other places we've been the last couple decades during the GWAT, we had a significant ground presence, forward operating bases, friendly forces in the area where we could effect a rescue a lot quicker, a lot
Mm.
easier. However, in this situation, it requires a lot more work that goes into it. So the moment those pilots ejected, I'm not privy to all of the little ins and outs that go on the planning side, at a higher level at the command. But typically, a number of things happen. One, friendly aircraft in the area recognize that pretty quickly. Then they start radioing into their headquarters, letting them know, hey, there is, an aircraft incident. There is our isolated personnel on the ground. And that sets into, motion a chain of events, essentially. There's like five personnel recovery tasks. Those are report. So basically letting higher headquarters know that, hey, we have isolated personnel on the ground. Second thing that needs to happen is locate. We need to actually locate their position, their previous position, and where we think they're going to be, so their whereabouts. Three, support. So basically trying to provide support, communications, establish some sort of communication line with them, if possible. Four, recover, where you actually see the forces, aircraft, ground forces, PJs, Delta, whoever is going in to recover them, actually put hands on the patient, on the isolated personnel, and then 5 reintegrate. So that involves, after we recover them, bring them back to, friendly forces, bring them back to where we're located at. And then talking to SEER personnel for debriefing, talking to combat rescue officers, which are, officers for PJs, and SEER personnel for part of the reintegration, figuring out, what exactly happened, what led up to this, what occurred on the ground after you were isolated between the time that you became isolated and when you were picked up. And seeing, of course, how they're doing medically, how they're doing physically. Again, traumatic experience ejecting. So they're going through a number of different things during that reintegration pipeline on the tail end of it. So from a pilot's perspective, very, very confusing, disorienting, I'm sure. But in those initial few minutes, those are critical because you are trying to orient yourself to where you're at. You're trying to get your bearings and you're trying to identify any sort of key terrain around you, somewhere where you can either go to a friendly village potentially, or isolate in the mountains, as it appears the Wizzo did. So there's a lot of actions and decisions that happen in the first few critical minutes. And whenever the Iranians are aware that there is an aircraft shot down, of course they're going to converge on the location. So the more distance you can put between yourself and the impact site, the better.
Wow. Amazing. That's a great breakdown. Definitely just a little education for those of us that are not in sort of the recovery community, seeing how that kind of takes place. That's really, really wild. And definitely, I mean, it has to be scary as shit when you're on the ground, trying, like you said, you're disoriented from being ejected out of an aircraft to getting your bearings in Iran. Wild. So I'm going to pivot a little bit to what I am like calling in this moment a force to mission mismatch. This is one of the conspiracies kind of going around. Was this a raid on the nuclear facilities, or was this really just actually all those assets for this one guy? What would you say? I mean, it said 155 aircraft. They had SEAL Team 6 in there. Basically, stood up a forward operating base at this agricultural, airfield. 2 C-130s were destroyed, 4 helicopters destroyed, and A-10 was lost. What does the force package tell you about this?
Yeah, really significant force package, of course. A lot of aircraft and personnel involved. I will say during personnel recovery operations, personnel recovery operations are something that's kind of baked into any operation that occurs, particularly with aircraft. And whenever we have isolated personnel on the ground, we will move heaven and earth. The U.S. military will move heaven and earth to recover them. By whatever means possible. And of course, we saw that. So whenever it comes down to actually isolating finding these people and recovering the isolated personnel, there are a lot of things that occur. We've heard in the news a lot of things about, deception operations being conducted through, human sources potentially, different actions being conducted with airstrikes in different locations for diversions. So whenever I hear it, maybe, yes, potentially there could have been something else going on as a cover. But from a personal recovery standpoint, the main thing that we're focusing on is the isolated personnel and not necessarily paying attention to, hey, what other actions may be occurring during this. We build our op boards and we launch on, pretty truncated timelines. So we don't have a whole lot of time to plan. So a lot of our operations orders, we pre-plan ahead of time. We have a lot of, standardized operating procedures that we understand, we train to a high standard, so that whenever these, launch authorities, execute authorities get given to us, we can get out the door as quickly as possible. And whenever, these individuals go down, aircraft and pilots do not get shot down very often, especially over the last 26 years in the Middle East. It's a rare event. So again, coming down and moving heaven and earth. I mean, you're sending in, helicopters. Yeah, so a fighter gets shot down, right? Man-pad threat, other surface-to-air missile threats potentially that are larger. If they're shooting down fighter aircraft moving a lot faster, higher altitude, then helicopters are a much bigger target, juicier, easier target to hit. So whenever we're talking about 155 aircraft, in addition to diversionary strikes to try to distract Iranian forces and other locations from where we might actually be moving to, you have all these aircraft providing persistent overhead coverage. That's everything from ISR to strikes, and there's a lot of in between transportation aircraft, refueling aircraft, landing aircraft at the FARP, contingency assets for those that are currently in the air. So there is a lot that goes into even just a single recovery like this. And regardless of what other things may or may not have been going on in the background, a lot of assets go into a single operation.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, when you say it like that. And that is, no man left behind is a well-known slogan across cultural zeitgeist. So it's literally
Yeah,
happening.
yeah,
You can see it.
yeah.
It's pretty cool, honestly. I mean, it's a uniquely American thing. I feel like, obviously we have the capability to do that. And I think speaks to the professionalism of the force, but also to the ability to project power that we still retain is significant. Pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. I'll stress whenever we have an isolated personnel incident like this, again, as rare as it is, all assets in theater kind of turn towards that effort.
Mhm.
Unless there are other active combat operations going on, a lot of assets get slaved over to the current personal recovery efforts. So it takes everyone. It's not just the recovery team. It's not just the pilots. It's everyone.
Yep, makes sense. Makes sense. So now I'm gonna pivot again here a little bit. This is more
Yep.
geopolitics type question.
Sure.
So I, call this like the gap between what is the ceasefire, okay, and then sort of the normal baseline, perhaps after the conflict, okay. So what I mean is, like, if you were briefing a non-military audience, like let's just say an investor or shipping
Yep.
analytics, right? Because there's a ton of ships in the Strait of Hormuz right now.
Yeah.
People trying to price how long this conflict actually lasts. Like, what would you tell them based on your own experience? What in your estimation, do you think, there's a ceasefire announcement basically tonight, right before we came on this call from Trump, Iran via Pakistan mediators, that they're looking at potentially taking a 2 week pause. So what do you think, based on operational conditions, everything that's going on the ground? Do you think we're going to return to normal with shipping in the strait? Or is this a duration that maybe most people still haven't fully embraced or I guess understood? What's the duration
Yeah.
question?
No. Yeah. Great question. Very difficult to say. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you're well aware. I'm not an Iran expert, so I don't fully understand, how Iran may behave to this. I will say that a key objective, despite the administration's kind of back and forth about what the true objective of, the conflict actually is, a key objective now at this point is opening the Strait of Hormuz because, that not only affects, us, but it affects the rest of the world's oil
Mhm.
prices. And as, domestic politics show, oil prices, gas prices speak volumes very quickly. So that's a key, obviously, objective of these current negotiations going on right now. If I were talking to investors and I was providing advice to them, I would say, prepare to hold out a little bit longer. As we've seen for a lot of ceasefire negotiations between, Israel and Hamas, looking at Ukraine, Russia, and now, the U.S. and Israel and, well, primarily the U.S. and Iran right now. A lot of previous ceasefires have broken down. And unfortunately, there are a lot of different competing objectives on both sides of the spectrum. And I think that Iran has a very strong hand in, closing off the strait right now. They kind of have the cards are kind of in their hand right now. So that's gonna be tough for the Trump administration to kind of negotiate and open up again. I know a 2 week ceasefire. I believe I was reading a couple hours ago. Iran had potentially accepted a 2 week ceasefire.
Mhm.
Whether or not that holds, though, while continued finalized talks go on, I'm not sure. I wouldn't bet on it myself. Um, because I think a lot of their stated goals and objectives are quite at odds with what the U.S. wants right now. A little maximalist, I think, on both sides. So in terms of anything holding out and actually lasting, it's hard to say. If I were a betting man, I'd be prepared to hold out. And you see the effect of, a couple years ago, the Houthis, shut down the Red Sea shipping lanes, and that was a very small force, caused billions in international economic damage. So looking at what the Iranians can do with the Strait of Hormuz, I think it's like 20 to 25% of world crude oil travels through there to the rest of the world. They have a very strong bargaining chip right there, and they know how to use it. So this is going to be a prolonged thing. I think with the amount of force posture we have in the region, the amount of assets that we've put in the region, I would be hesitant to make any rash decisions as an investor.
Interesting. Awesome. Okay, so now this is kind of like a more speculative question. So I'm asking you to speculate a little bit. So don't worry, it doesn't have to be like purely academic, like, oh, I have no low confidence, high confidence. That's fine. The
Yeah.
question I have here is, I Opus is very much about reading the structural signals.
Yep.
And so what I mean by that is and this was actually something that I was one of the founding sort of like thesis that I started Opus with, but basically the proliferation of publicly available satellite imagery, I said, was going to become an issue for governments.
Yep.
This
Yep.
was borne out, and I guess it was April 5th, I believe. The
Yep.
Trump administration asked Planet Labs, as well as a number of other satellite providers, to not provide any satellite imagery. So we effectively have a satellite blackout for these
Yeah.
companies. And it's actually retroactive to March 9th. So looking at,
Mhm.
again, reading between the lines, it seems since March 9th, there may be some sort of buildup of something that they don't want monitored. And the blackout's in place. The OAS read is maybe
Yep.
there's going to be a raid on the physical uranium. But what do you make out of the satellite blackout? In your experience, like what kind of operations sort of require this kind of like level of information control?
Sure. Yeah. No, this is the big question right now, right? It's difficult to say because, in recent years we've seen the democratization of intelligence, right? You see
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of different satellite companies, enterprises providing open source information, satellite imagery that pretty much anyone can buy. I think what makes sense to me from my perspective is that the administration may want to restrict access to these sources of like this privatized imagery to Iranian and other adversaries, intelligence services, so that they can't conduct operational planning effectively to what the U.S. is doing. If they don't know where our ships are, if they don't know where our aircraft and our people are, it becomes a lot more difficult for them to respond to any sort of kinetic actions that we take. As well as almost nearly impossible for them to conduct battle damage assessments, which is a really important part of kinetic operations of determining, hey, was this strike effective or not? I think the idea, practically, it would be to limit Iranians from actually determining, what is going on, and beyond that, like if their strikes are actually effective or not, if they're hitting anything important. Um, it potentially could be cover for sure for as we've seen in the news, it's a lot of rumored intelligence has kind of gone around suggesting that we may be conducting an actual raid into one of the nuclear sites to recover nuclear material. It's possible, as a safeguarding measure, as an operational security measure for that. But I don't know. I'm not sure if that's going to be launched or not. That's one of the difficult things to say. We have the forces in theater to do it theoretically, but I can't think of a time in recent history where we've conducted an operation like that with so few ground forces, on the ground in support of it. So it'll be really interesting to see in the next few days and few weeks what actually happens.
Interesting. Interesting.
Sorry, I
Uh,
can't give you a solidified answer on it, but
Hey, no worries, no worries. That's the
that's my
point of
best
it. It's
guess.
open ended. There's
Yeah,
we
yeah.
don't know. We really don't know.